The call came in on October 12, 2013. A 27-year-old woman named Kelly Dwyer had failed to show up for work, hadn't contacted anyone, and her phone had gone silent. I had been assigned missing person cases before, but something about this one felt different from the start. Kelly wasn't the type to go off the grid. She was known for her consistent communication, her active social media presence, and her punctuality. Yet, here we were, with no signs of her and a growing unease about where this might lead. The first thing we did was piece together her last known movements. According to her friends and family, Kelly had gone out 2 nights earlier, October 10th, with her boyfriend, Chris Zako. They'd started at a bar and hopped around downtown Milwaukee. The night ended, as far as we could tell, with the two of them returning to Chris's apartment. Tech footage confirmed that they entered the building together just after 2:30 a.m. Chris Zako described their time together in a detached, almost rehearsed manner. He claimed they'd taken drugs, had sex, and fallen asleep in the living room. Around 9 a.m., he said, Kelly got up, told him she was heading out, and left. He hadn't seen or heard from her since. It was a story that, on the surface, seemed plausible, but there were problems with it almost immediately. Kelly's phone activity was a critical starting point. Her last known signal was recorded near Chris's apartment building at 10:06 a.m. on October 11th, an hour after he claimed she had left. If she'd walked out as he said, there should have been more movement, more signals, as her phone connected to different towers. Instead, her phone went silent, completely untraceable from that point on. We examined the security footage from the building. It was comprehensive, minus 28 cameras covering every entrance, exit, and common area. It didn't take long to confirm what we feared: Kelly never left. The footage showed her entering with Chris early in the morning, but no cameras ever captured her leaving. Not at 9 a.m., not at any time after. We turned our attention back to Chris. His demeanor was calm, too calm given the circumstances. He mentioned that their relationship wasn't as serious as Kelly might have made it seem. To him, it was casual, a friends with benefits situation. He suggested she might have been seeing other people, throwing out vague names as possible leads. None of it added up. Kelly's friends described her as deeply attached to Chris, even smitten. It was hard to reconcile their accounts of her feelings with the dismissive tone Chris used when he spoke about her. As we dug deeper into Chris's background, his carefully polished image began to crumble. He was a 38-year-old IT professional with a history that didn't quite match the stability he projected. He had a long-term girlfriend, Megan, who knew nothing about Kelly. Their relationship was described as serious, even heading toward marriage. Yet, Megan had no idea that Chris had been seeing another woman for a year. It was clear Chris lived a compartmentalized life, keeping different aspects of himself hidden from those around him. On the ground, Kelly's family and friends were relentless. Her father, Tony, flew in and led search efforts, canvassing neighborhoods, handing out flyers, and speaking to anyone who might have seen something. Kelly's co-workers from Lululemon joined in, distributing posters and making calls. The community was mobilized, but as the hours turned into days, hope began to waver. The first break came not from a witness or a tip, but from a gut instinct. Something about Chris's story didn't sit right. His apartment became a focal point for the investigation. When officers conducted their first walkthrough, they noted the faint smell of bleach in the bathroom, a missing shower curtain, and rugs that seemed recently removed. These details, small on their own, painted a picture that was hard to ignore. As we prepared to delve deeper into Chris's life in his apartment, the questions loomed large. If Kelly never left the building, where was she? And what role did Chris play in her disappearance? This was just the beginning, but it already felt like we were running out of time. The search of Chris Zako's apartment began as a routine exercise, but the scene quickly unraveled into something far darker. Inside, the space was meticulously clean, too clean. The faint chemical scent of bleach lingered in the air, particularly in the bathroom. Items that should have been there were missing: a shower curtain, a bath mat, and towels. The absence of these everyday objects felt deliberate, as if someone had erased parts of the apartment's story. We moved methodically through the space, documenting every detail. On Chris's shelves and in his closets, we found a disturbing collection of materials, hard drives, CDs, and personal devices that revealed a different side of him. Forensic analysis uncovered hundreds of files containing explicit child abuse material, alongside violent pornography involving asphyxiation. It was shocking. grotesque evidence that painted a chilling portrait of Chris's private life. Then came the most damning discovery of video on Chris's phone. It showed Kelly during a sexual encounter, bound and visibly distressed. She was struggling to breathe, blindfolded, and her discomfort was unmistakable. The timestamp placed the video just weeks before her disappearance. The footage raised immediate questions. Had this consensual act gone too far? Or was it a sign of something far more sinister? Other photos we recovered told a similar story. In some, Kelly appeared unconscious, her body limp, her vulnerability evident. As we pieced together the evidence, a harrowing possibility emerged. Kelly might have been killed during one of these encounters, and Chris had gone to great lengths to cover it up. Chris was brought in for questioning, but the interrogation was over almost as soon as it started. He requested a lawyer, shutting down any opportunity to confront him with the evidence. With his silence, we turned to the surveillance footage from the apartment building. The cameras captured Chris and Kelly entering his building at 2:30 a.m. on October 11th. From that moment, Kelly was never seen again. Chris, however, was spotted multiple times. At 10:06 a.m., he left the building in his car. When he returned less than 15 minutes later, he opened his trunk briefly before heading back inside. Later that evening, he left again, this time with sports equipment loaded into his car. The timeline was critical. Between 3 a.m. and 10:06 a.m., something had happened to Kelly. The bleach smell in the bathroom suggested an attempt to clean up a scene. The missing items hinted at disposal efforts. But where was Kelly? As we pieced together the timeline, Megan, Chris's long-term girlfriend, came forward with her account. She described Chris as acting strangely in the days following Kelly's disappearance. On October 11th, he was over an hour late for dinner, claiming his phone had issues. He was agitated and restless, constantly checking his phone. That night, he stayed at Megan's condo, sweating profusely through the sheets, leaving her puzzled. The next morning, Chris embarked on a 160-mile round trip to Madison, Wisconsin. He told Megan he was buying cheese as a gift for her family, a bizarre and flimsy excuse that didn't align with his usual behavior. Surveillance footage and credit card records confirmed his movements. He purchased a pair of shoes on the way back, but what stood out was the window of time unaccounted for during that trip. It was long enough to dispose of a body. As we delved deeper, cadaver dogs were brought into Chris's apartment and car. The results were damning. The dogs reacted strongly to several areas: Chris's bed, the bathroom, the trash chute near his apartment, and the trunk of his car. Their responses provided critical leads, but also confirmed what we feared: Kelly was dead, and Chris had likely moved her body. The forensic team identified Kelly's DNA on a black glove found in Chris's car. The evidence was mounting, but we still had no body. Without it, the case was circumstantial, and Chris's defense team would exploit every gap in our narrative. For Kelly's family, the uncertainty was unbearable. They continued to search tirelessly, distributing flyers, speaking to the media, and offering rewards for information. Their pain was palpable, their hope dwindling with each passing day. We knew we were closing in on Chris, but proving what happened in that apartment would be a monumental challenge. The investigation was intensifying, and we could feel the weight of justice hanging in the balance. We needed one final piece to tie it all together. Until then, Kelly's fate remained shrouded in darkness. The breakthrough we were hoping for came 6 weeks into the investigation. A cadaver dog searching near Chris's apartment provided a critical lead, reacting strongly in the parking area and near his assigned space. The implication was clear: Kelly's body, or evidence connected to it, had been in Chris's car. But without the body, we were still operating on a circumstantial foundation. Pressure was mounting. The media coverage was relentless, and Kelly's family was desperate for answers. Meanwhile, Chris posted bail for the child abuse and drug charges and was free, walking the same streets where Kelly had vanished. This reality fueled our urgency. Every lead had to be explored. We knew Chris had taken a suspicious trip to Madison shortly after Kelly disappeared. His explanation about buying cheese was flimsy at best. We retraced his route, studying surveillance footage and reviewing his credit card transactions. Along the way, a purchase for a pair of shoes stood out. It was a seemingly mundane detail, but the timestamp placed him near a wooded area that could have served as a potential dump site. The discovery came a year and a half after Kelly disappeared. A local resident walking near a rural embankment spotted what looked like human remains. He called the police, and the forensic team quickly descended on the site. Tangled in overgrown vegetation, they found a skeleton. Most of the remains were intact, apart from a few small bones, and the positioning of the body was chilling. The legs were twisted unnaturally, and one arm was bent behind the torso, suggesting a hurried, careless burial. Dental records confirmed what we feared. The remains belonged to Kelly Dwyer. The confirmation sent shockwaves through her family, who had clung to faint hope that she might still be alive. For them, the discovery brought a cruel kind of closure. They now had answers, but also the grim reality of Kelly's final moments. Our focus turned to reconstructing the events of October 11th and 12th. Surveillance footage, cadaver dog reactions, and Chris's movements painted a grim picture. Between 3 a.m. and 7 a.m., something had gone terribly wrong in Chris's apartment. Kelly had entered alive but never left. We believed Chris had wrapped her body in his shower curtain and stuffed her into a travel golf bag, a bag Megan confirmed was missing from his apartment. The bag, along with the shower curtain and other items, was likely discarded during his trip to Madison. What was undeniable was the fact that Chris's actions were deliberate. The removal of the SIM card from his phone, the lengthy trip under the guise of an innocuous errand, and the decision to leave Kelly's body in a secluded area all pointed to a man methodically covering his tracks. Witnesses came forward, adding damning context to the narrative. Several of Chris's ex-girlfriends described violent and disturbing behavior during their relationships. They recounted instances of non-consensual choking during sexual encounters, ignoring safe words, and pushing boundaries to dangerous extremes. One woman detailed a terrifying night where she genuinely feared for her life. This pattern painted Chris as someone who repeatedly crossed the line between consensual and abusive behavior, escalating to lethal consequences. The evidence was mounting, but the timeline remained critical. Kelly's phone last connected to a cell tower near Chris's apartment at 10:06 a.m. on October 11th, hours after he claimed she had left at 9 a.m. This contradiction was pivotal, proving his account was a lie. Surveillance footage showed Chris leaving the building with his car at the same time. He returned minutes later, briefly opening his trunk, an action we believed was tied to disposing of Kelly's phone. Later that evening, Chris left again, ostensibly to deliver sports equipment to his mother's house. We suspected this trip was when he finalized his plan to dispose of Kelly's body. The 160-mile round trip to Madison aligned with the window of time when she was moved. His erratic behavior during this period, including his unexplained absence and bizarre excuses, added weight to our theory. Chris's girlfriend, Megan, became an unexpected key witness. She described his agitation and nervous demeanor in the days following Kelly's disappearance. He was sweating profusely at night, restless and unusually distant. Her observations corroborated our timeline, suggesting he was struggling to maintain the facade of normalcy. By the time the forensic team completed their analysis, we had a solid case. Soil samples confirmed Kelly's body had been at the same location since her disappearance, and the condition of her remains suggested she had been wrapped in a material like the missing shower curtain. The circumstantial web we had woven now felt unbreakable. But the hardest part was still to come, bringing this case to trial and ensuring justice for Kelly. The sheer brutality of her death weighed on all of us. It wasn't just about solving the crime, it was about making sure her story was told and the person responsible for her suffering was held accountable. We were ready to fight for Kelly. As investigators, our role became clearer as the evidence piled up. This was no longer a missing persons case, it was a homicide investigation with Chris Zako squarely in the crosshairs. But we knew circumstantial cases like this were challenging, requiring meticulous preparation and airtight connections between each piece of evidence. Our first hurdle was to construct a coherent timeline. Kelly Dwyer was last seen entering Chris's apartment in the early hours of October 11, 2013. Surveillance cameras confirmed this, but no footage showed her leaving. Chris's own words betrayed him. His claim that Kelly left at 9 a.m. was unsupported by any camera, and her phone's last ping tied her to his building an hour later. These contradictions gave us a foundation, but we needed more. The forensic evidence from Chris's apartment provided chilling details. The torn shower curtain, missing towels, and heavy smell of bleach in his bathroom painted a scene of hurried cleanup. The cadaver dog's reactions, particularly near the trash chute and his parking spot, cemented our suspicions. Kelly's DNA on the glove found in his car suggested she had been transported from the apartment. Every clue pointed to Chris's deliberate efforts to hide what had happened. Then there were the items that were missing: his travel golf bag, the shower curtain, and other bathroom accessories. Megan, his girlfriend, confirmed these items were always in his apartment but disappeared after Kelly's last known visit. This golf bag became a focal point in our theory. It was the most plausible way Chris could have transported Kelly's body unnoticed, especially given the timing of his movements and the large fan temporarily obscuring the parking lot camera. Chris's actions in the days following Kelly's disappearance were equally damning. His unexplained 17-hour phone blackout aligned suspiciously with his round trip to Madison. He had claimed he was buying cheese for Megan's family, but the real reason for the trip became clear. It was the perfect opportunity to dispose of Kelly's body far from Milwaukee. The discovery of Kelly's remains over a year later in a remote embankment just miles off his route strengthened this theory. Witness testimony added another layer to the case. Chris's ex-girlfriends provided harrowing accounts of his violent behavior during sex, his disregard for boundaries, and his escalating need for control. One ex described an incident where he ignored her safe word, choking her until she nearly lost consciousness. These patterns matched what we suspected had happened to Kelly, showing a man whose tendencies had spiraled into fatal consequences. Perhaps most telling was the digital evidence. Videos and images on Chris's hard drive showed explicit acts of asphyxiation involving Kelly and others. One video, dated just weeks before Kelly's disappearance, depicted her in clear distress, bound and blindfolded. The images of her unconscious further underscored the danger she was in while with Chris. Combined with the discovery of violent pornography and child abuse material, it painted a picture of someone with deeply troubling impulses. As we prepared the case for trial, every detail had to fit seamlessly. We traced Chris's movements, analyzed his phone activity, and interviewed every witness who could shed light on his behavior. Even Megan, who initially defended Chris, began to provide critical insights. She confirmed his odd demeanor, his unexplained absences, and his sudden willingness to move out of Milwaukee after resisting the idea for years. Despite the mountain of evidence, we knew the defense would challenge every point. They'd argue the lack of direct proof, claim Kelly's death was accidental, or suggest someone else was responsible. Anticipating this, we doubled down on the timeline, showing how Chris's lies unraveled when held against the facts. His refusal to explain why Kelly's body was found miles away, his efforts to erase evidence, and his history of violent behavior left no room for doubt. Kelly's family remained at the forefront of our minds. Her parents were relentless in their pursuit of justice, attending every press conference and offering rewards for information. Their heartbreak was palpable, and their strength inspired us to keep going. As her father put it, they just wanted to bring Kelly home and give her the respect she deserved. The trial loomed on the horizon, and with every piece of evidence secured, our resolve grew. We weren't just building a case against Chris Zako, we were fighting for Kelly, her family, and the countless victims of violence whose voices were often silenced. This was our chance to make sure Kelly's story was heard, and that the person responsible for her suffering was held accountable. We would see this through, no matter what. The courtroom was tense, every seat filled with Kelly Dwyer's family, friends, and those who had followed her tragic story. After nearly 5 years, justice for Kelly was finally within reach. We had worked tirelessly to ensure that every piece of evidence, every timeline discrepancy, and every horrifying detail of Chris Zako's behavior was meticulously presented. Now, it was time to see if it would be enough. The defense team leaned heavily on the lack of direct evidence. They argued that there was no clear video showing Chris removing Kelly's body, no eyewitnesses to confirm their theory, and no definitive cause of death. They pointed to inconsistencies in the timeline and tried to dismiss Chris's behavior as mere coincidence. But the jury wasn't swayed by smoke and mirrors, they had the facts. The prosecution delivered a powerful closing argument. They reminded the jury of Kelly's last known moments, caught on surveillance video, and how she never exited the building. They outlined Chris's chilling behavior in the days after her disappearance, the 17-hour phone blackout, the bleach-scrubbed apartment, and the disposal of his golf bag. The gruesome details of the evidence on his hard drives and the testimony from his ex-girlfriends painted the picture of a man with a dangerous and escalating pattern of violence. The cadaver dog's reactions in his apartment, parking lot, and car were emphasized, as was the timeline showing that Kelly's phone pinged for the last time while in Chris's building. The jury was asked to consider the mountain of circumstantial evidence, each piece of thread that, when woven together, created an unbreakable case. When the verdict was read, there was a collective exhale in the courtroom. Guilty. On all counts. Kelly's family wept openly, her mother clutching her father's arm as the relief washed over them. Justice had been served, but it wasn't enough to fill the void Kelly had left in their lives. For them, this moment was bittersweet, a step toward closure, but also a stark reminder of all they had lost. The sentencing hearing was as emotional as the trial itself. The judge didn't mince words, condemning Chris for his actions and his blatant disregard for human life. He highlighted how Chris had continued his life as if nothing had happened, hiding behind lies and manipulation while Kelly's family suffered. The judge called Chris a danger to society and sentenced him to 31 years in prison for Kelly's death, to be served consecutively with the 19 years he was already serving for child pornography and drug charges. Kelly's parents spoke during the hearing, their words heavy with grief, but also with gratitude for the justice system and those who fought tirelessly for their daughter. Her mother described the agony of not knowing where Kelly was for over a year and the torment of imagining her final moments. Her father, stoic but emotional, expressed relief that they could finally lay Kelly to rest and honor her memory properly. Chris's appeals began almost immediately, but none found success. Each time, the courts upheld his convictions, leaving him to spend the rest of his life in prison. For Kelly's family, it was a small comfort knowing he would never harm another person again. The case left a lasting impact on Milwaukee. It highlighted the importance of vigilance in the face of domestic violence and raised awareness about the dangers of unchecked patterns of abuse. Kelly's friends and family established a foundation in her name, advocating for better resources for victims and education on consent and safety in relationships. As an investigator, this case left its mark on me. It was a reminder of the weight of our work, the lives we touch, the families we fight for, and the importance of bringing the truth to light. For Kelly Dwyer, we found that truth. Though it came too late to save her, it brought her family the justice they deserved. And in the end, that's what we strive for, justice for those who can no longer speak for themselves.